Okay, we're back again, South Beach Gospel Ministries. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe, make comments. It helps the algorithm, sends the video all the way around the world. So stop me if you've heard this one before. We interrupt our regularly scheduled Bible teaching for a Bible prophecy update. And 2 weeks ago, last time we were here, we had a regularly scheduled teaching. We're going to talk about the non-negotiable gospel, but we couldn't because of breaking news. And that news 2 weeks ago was the president announcing the existence of UFOs and the investigation into the existence of UFOs and disclosure. And goodness forbid, I'm away for 1 week to run a marathon, and I come back from the marathon and find out the world is on the verge of coming to an end. World War III is about to begin. I joke, but only a little bit. But yeah, 2 weeks ago when we were here, we talked about how the very first teaching of the year, the January 3rd, 2026 teaching. I'm going to put the links in the description box below for both the 2026 year in preview, the first teaching of the year, and the links to the UFO and the Bible and demonology teaching that we did a series on in Miami not too long ago. I'll put the links for that in there as well. But last time we were here, we talked about how the Disclosure Day movie and all of these serendipitous occurrences being likely that sometime in 2026 you might find some type of UFO disclosure, which again ties into the pre-tribulation rapture, because it's the only explanation that could be shopped to the people about why a billion people disappeared from the face of planet Earth in the snap of a finger. And so I said that when we look at the year preview, there are a couple of other things that we should be looking out for. One of the other things on our list of about 10 topics for the year to be looking at as precursors to the pre-tribulation rapture and the fulfillment of Bible prophecy was the Iran versus Israel versus the United States war. And remember, I had mentioned in January that, well, it ended after the 12-day war in June of 2025, but it ended prematurely. And I said, keep an eye on Israel and Iran and the United States and the resumption of military conflict. And sure enough, my first time off, in a while, God bless you guys, getting that last marathon of the season in, and the minute I'm going to pick up my registration for the race, I start getting text messages that, the United States has attacked Iran during the early morning hours, and we eventually found out that the actual supreme ruler of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, was actually killed, and his successor was killed. And Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was the president of Iran and gave the United States a heck of a lot of trouble, over the course of the last 10 years or so, that he was assassinated as well, or not assassinated, but really killed in the military struggle. So we are now going to do an update on what we already talked about. One of the 10 things to look for in the 2026 preview of the year in Bible prophecy would be the UFO fulfillment. We already talked about that last time we were here. And now we're talking about the Iran-Israel-America war. Is this the Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39? You've heard me talk about that so many times before. Is it, some people are saying Jeremiah chapter 49 makes reference to a war with Israel. Is that the fulfillment? Psalm 83 makes reference to a conflict that some are saying this is the Bible prophecy fulfillment of. So I'm going to hit all those issues, and we're going to talk about why I think certain things are true and certain things are not true. So let's jump right in there and get to it really quickly. Jeremiah chapter 49 makes reference to what? The Elamites. And these Elamites were a warrior nation tribe that surrounded Israel. Remember when God brought Abram out of Ur of the Chaldees in Mesopotamia, he led him into a land that he would show him, a land filled with milk and honey. It was the land of Canaan, which God co-opted, took over, and renamed after himself the land of Israel, which means prince with God. And then Abraham and Sarah had their very first child together after, goodness forbid, about 60 years of trying. She finally was able to supernaturally get pregnant, gave birth to Isaac, who gave birth to Jacob, who gave birth to 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel, of which Judah was one. And out of the tribe of Judah came the royal messianic line of the house of David. Remember, David the shepherd boy killed the Philistine giant Goliath and established that messianic house within the tribe of Judah, the house of David, from which the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, eventually would come out several generations later. And goodness forbid, last week, you know, this whole attack occurred the day before Purim. And Purim is what the entire book of Esther is all about. Book of Esther, that Old Testament book where Queen Esther, who was this young Jewish girl named Hadassah, remember they had been taken captive in the Babylonian captivity, and the Babylonian captivity, which was to last for 70 years, came to a conclusion when God co-opted the Babylonian Empire with the Persian Empire. Remember, they dammed up the river Euphrates and went under it during the night and took over a bloodless coup. And when, you know, the king of Babylon woke up the next morning, God had deposed him as ruler and replaced him with the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire eventually married in with the kingdom of Media to form the superstate of Media Persia. And Media Persia is where we get our kings of Persia and Media, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Longimanus, that gave us our 69 weeks of Daniel prophecy. And one of the kings, named Xerxes, was married to a woman who was the king, or the king's selected wife, the queen of the Persian Empire, Queen Vashti. But Queen Vashti, I don't know if she was the precursor to women's libers or whatever, but she was supposed to appear at one of the king's big balls, and she was like, nah, I'm busy, I got things to do, I'm going out with the girls for the night, and I'm not going to show up. And the king got mad and decided to replace her as queen through a beauty pageant. A young Jewish girl named Hadassah won and became the new queen of Persia. And she was renamed Esther, kind of the Persian language for like a bright star, brilliant. She was so beautiful, so incredible. And remember that Haman decided to plot against the Jewish people to destroy them because he was jealous of them. And eventually that whole thing played itself out. So God turned the tables, and it wound up that Mordecai, who was the cousin of Queen Esther, you know, said, hey, go to the king and ask the king to spare the life of your people, the Jewish people. And she said, if I go to the king without being invited, my head gets cut off. And he said, but the whole Jewish race that's now in, you know, remaining in exile in what was Babylon and now Persia is, you know, at risk. We may be all exterminated, and that will be the end of us as a people. And she said, well, you know what, I'm going to do that. She said, I'm going to go to the king and do this thing which is not lawful to do, and if I perish, I perish. But who knows whether the Lord has brought you into this situation for such a time as this, her cousin responded. She went to the king, he granted her the thumbs up, and basically the Jewish race was saved by the acts of a young teenage girl who become, through God's serendipitous arrangement of history, the queen of the Persian Empire, and Israel was saved. And Haman, who is a type of the Antichrist, and I would submit a type of anti-Semitism in today's world, wound up being hung on the gallows that he had prepared to kill all the Jewish people on. And so that resulted in a feast or a festival, or so, almost like a New Year's Day or a Christmas celebration, all combined together for the Jewish people that celebrate to this very day. And it's called the Feast of Purim, related to rolling dice. You know, that's part of the book of Esther, but we don't have time to look at that. But Purim was being celebrated the very next day. You know, March 2nd into March 3rd was Purim, and the attack occurred the day before. And then you had what some people are calling a blood moon on Purim. So people say, oh, the rapture is going to occur on that day, and so on and so forth. And that's another reason why we should strongly, with the greatest enthusiasm, reject individuals who claim that they can predict the date of the rapture. Because remember that disastrous kerfuffle we had back in September when a false prophet by the name of Brother Joseph claimed that he knew the exact date of the pre-tribulation rapture, and that he knew this date. Why? Because Jesus himself came into his bedroom and told him. So we knew right there, right? Remember, Jesus said in the Last Supper, John chapter 14, that I'm going away to my Father's house to prepare a place for you. But if I go away, I'll come again and receive you to myself, so that where I am, there you will be also. So that means he's telling us, and then we found out in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18, that this meeting with Jesus for the very first time is going to occur miles above the earth in the clouds in an event that's commonly referred to colloquially as the pre-tribulation rapture. So Jesus told us in Matthew chapter 24, we're going to look at it really quickly. If you meet a Jesus anywhere on the face of the planet Earth, or if some prophet says, oh, Jesus is in the cave, or Jesus is going to be at the Doral Ale House, or Jesus is going to be at Madison Square Garden, or Jesus is going to be in my bedroom later on tonight, don't believe him. Run away, because that's not the real Jesus. That is a biblical Jesus. That's the Jesus of Matthew 24, who is the fake Jesus that Jesus of Nazareth told us was coming and was a precursor to this pre-tribulation rapture. So again, in September we had this brother Joseph guy saying, oh no, he told it, and then he changed the date. Jesus came and visited him again, and as a result, all of the rapture hating Christians, goodness forbid, they're more virulent in hating the rapture than Satanists, Wiccans, New Agers, Darwinian evolutionists don't make fun of the pre-tribulation rapture believers in Jesus Christ, like, you know, like us here at South Beach Gospel Ministry, and many of you out there in the audience. I know that, you know, got one faithful brother who is not a pre-tribber, but he's given me his reasons. I respect that, and he's an awesome guy. That's my brother, Saint number 77. Saint 77, I know you're not a pre-trib guy, but it doesn't matter. When it happens, you're going up with us anyway, so you and your daughter. But anyway, I digress. So again, the pre-tribulation rapture concept was made a mockery of by the Presbyterians, the Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Pentecostals don't believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. They were all going on YouTube, and all these YouTube truthers, goodness forbid, they seem to multiply by exponential numbers each week when I turn on YouTube. You know, there's some new YouTube truther who's speaking out, and they almost all are super invidiously anti-pre-tribulation rapture. And I think that because we're such a small minority in the body of Christendom, as it were, I think that's one of the reasons why we can know it's the truth. Because, you know, Jesus said he wasn't going to be popular, he wasn't going to be loved, and if he wasn't, then we wouldn't be either. And the concept of Jesus being able to snatch his bride out of the way of destruction before God unleashes his wrath upon a Christ-rejecting world, that's a concept that scares the bejeemity out of Satan and all of the fallen angels and all of the disembodied spirit beings that we call demons in the Bible. They all know it's coming, and they're all terrified. I remember my very first encounter with a demon-possessed young girl about 15 feet over there, just a few years, many years back, when I was you know, starting out doing evangelism here on the street. And I remember you mentioned the lake of fire, which I did because I didn't know what else to say when I was like a demon-possessed person. I never knew anything about a demon-possessed person, never seen anything like that. But when I thought, man, let me flip over to Revelation chapter 19, the lake of fire. But before I could even say the word or grab my Bible, it almost seemed like the spirit entity had precognition and knew what I was thinking and what I was going to say. And it said it for me, the lake of fire. Oh no, the lake of fire. I can assure you, if you ever are, you know, whether it be blessed or unblessed enough to encounter a demon-possessed person and they communicate with you while you're trying to do evangelism and lead that person, the young girl, accepted Christ actually and became born again, and that's what she was trying to do when this thing manifested in her. They are terrified. I would submit to you, I mean terrified. I almost felt sympathy for this disembodied spirit being that sounded like an ancient man talking to the body of this little girl, but he was so terrified of the concept of the lake of fire, it almost made you feel sympathy. They know it's coming, and they know that that last 7-year clock that will lead up to them eventually being reposed in the lake of fire forever will be triggered by the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel, which will be triggered by that pre-tribulation rapture. So anyway, back to our topic at hand. We had talked about how Purim was a celebration of the salvation of the Jewish people, and how was it ironic? Was it planned on purpose? I wouldn't put it past Benjamin Netanyahu to have planned that attack in conjunction with President Trump intentionally to send the message that God will look out for his people, just like he did, you know, some 2,500, 2,800 years ago, when the first Purim was celebrated, when he supernaturally preserved the nation of Israel while they were in Persia before they returned into their land. That was an example of what we saw happening, I would submit to you, over the course of the last 7 days. This war has been going on now for 7 days, and it's my understanding, looking at some of the intel I get, that they're actually even planning a strike on the nuclear facility at Fordo in Iran, and they're telling civilians to move out of the way. And this could get really, really wildly crazy. But again, let's take a look and see, is this a fulfillment of Bible prophecy? Yes. Is this the fulfillment of the prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 relating to the war of Gog and Magog? I would say that's a strong no. Is this a fulfillment of the prophecy related to Elam in Jeremiah chapter 49? Again, strong no. Is this a beginning or precursor? This is the most popular opinion on Christian social media and Christian truther channels, that this is a precursor to a specific war called the Psalm 83 war, because of the enemies of Israel listed in Psalm 83. Now, again, that's a hard no. What I will say is that for absolute certainty, Persia is modern day Iran. Iran was always known as Persia from before the Babylonian captivity all the way up to 1935, when Iran changed its name to Iran from Persia to associate themselves with their supposed believed Aryan forebears. You know, Adolf Hitler and the Aryan supremacy, sort of these God-men that supposedly descended down from out of heaven, and they became the myth. You can see the stories out there of the Aryan race of super beings. Adolf Hitler thought that they were the root race that traced from these individuals, maybe related to the Nephilim, who knows, maybe related to the UFO entities that are called, you know, the Nordics, that have blonde hair and blue eyes and are incredibly beautiful and tall and very lean and muscular and very appealing to look at. For instance, Romania did the same thing to a certain extent related to the Roman Empire. Remember back when Nadia Comaneci won the Olympic gold medals back in 1976, when she hit the first perfect 10 scores in gymnastics, Romania had, prior to that, spelled their name R-U-M-A-N-I-A, Romania, with a R-U's and a hard U sound. Then they changed it to Romania. Why? Because they wanted to associate themselves with their heritage, which they believe descends out of the former Roman Empire that spread out to include areas which includes modern-day Romania. And so they changed the spelling and pronunciation of their nation's name. So it's not unusual. This isn't some unusual occurrence. This happens many times with nations. They'll change the spelling or pronunciation or even the outright name, just as Persia did. They wanted to associate with this Aryan super race, so they changed their name to Iran. And remember, the Iranians had always been, until the Islamic overthrow in 1978 into early 1979, when Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah of Iran, and the Shah of Iran, who had been, this is basically a secular humanist state. The ancestral religion of the Iranians was what? Zoroastrianism. And who did they worship? They worshiped the winged sun disk god Ahura Mazda. And so I found out an interesting statistic, however, that when the Shah of Iran was overthrown by Ayatollah Khomeini at the end of 1978, leading into 1979, there were only about 100,000 Christians in Iran. Zoroastrianism, the official religion, Islam, was also a minority religion there. When the Ayatollah came in, it became the official state religion, and they got, the official state mandated Iranian, Sharia law. You either convert to Islam or you will die. If you don't follow the clothing, like wearing the hijab and things of that nature, women could be beaten, imprisoned, or killed. And that's exactly what occurred. Both men and women were both tortured, imprisoned, and killed prior to the Iranian Islamic Revolution of Ayatollah Khomeini, the former leader, the Shah of Iran, had used SAVAK, which was really a CIA and British MI6 cutout that really installed, if we're going to be honest, if you know, my background in political science speaking through me, you know, really the Shah of Iran was installed by British MI6 because of oil interests, because they had such great oil reserves and they wanted to make sure they don't fall into the wrong hands. And the CIA helped out, and so Mohammad Mossadegh was overthrown in 1953 and replaced with an installation who became the original Shah, Reza Pahlavi. His son is now the Crown Prince, who looks like he's going to be the front runner to go back in and become the new leader of Iran once this Iranian war is over. But when Reza Pahlavi, the original, was installed by the CIA and MI6, you know, at that point in time, there wasn't out and out persecution against Christianity. Just there weren't any people there. You were either Zoroastrian, which is the ancestral religion of the Iranian Persian people, or you were a Muslim. And interestingly enough, since the rise of the totalitarian Islamic State that now is, or up until a week ago, was being run by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which was even more brutal than the SAVAK secret police of the original Shah of Iran, which turned the people off and maybe gave an opening to the Ayatollah Khomeini to come in. This Iranian Revolutionary Guard was so brutal in arresting, torturing, kidnapping people that, goodness forbid, you either had to comply with the Sharia law or your very life could be at stake. But an interesting thing happened on the way to the forum. Over the course of the past 47 years of oppressive, totalitarian, horrific persecution of everyone that doesn't accept fundamentalist Sharia law Islam, guess what happened with the Christians? The Christian population, which was at 100,000, expanded exponentially 10 times. There are now, as of the day that I'm speaking to you, over 1 million Christians in the nation of Iran. How is that even possible? They were persecuted brutally and put to death, put in death camps, put in re-education camps, tortured. But they grew exponentially 10 times what they were under the far more lax and accepting Shah of Iran's secular humanist government. What does that teach us? It teaches us that what Jesus said about persecution is true. He said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you, because the servant isn't greater than the master. And the takeaway is what? That the blood of the martyrs, the blood of the saints, like we see going on in Nigeria, and persecution combined together are the seeds and the fertilizer of the real church of Jesus Christ. Christianity has flourished under the persecution and bloodshed of a violent, horrific Islamic regime, so that now the church is 10 times bigger and stronger than it was when there was no persecution. That's something that we Christians, especially over here in the West, in the United States, we need to think about that. And speaking of persecution, good news is, I guess a little bit of it is coming. I was just reading an article earlier today that in Germany they arrested a street preacher for preaching the gospel in public, and they said he violated a noise ordinance and took him into custody and so on and so forth. And then I was shocked to find out, reading a related article, that in Dallas, Texas, here in the United States, which is kind of the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, some people would say, an individual was arrested, apprehended, not charged, but for the same thing. He was, he's doing some evangelism in an open air area and was told to be quiet. And when he didn't, he was placed in handcuffs and basically was detained for 30 minutes. They eventually couldn't find anything to charge him with, but that in Dallas, which was always considered a super ultra conservative Christian stronghold, which is different than, say, the state capital of Texas, Austin, which is very liberal, sort of like Ann Arbor, Michigan, kind of a liberal college town. Shocking that in Dallas, Texas, you could be detained, handcuffed and basically placed under arrest. If you're no longer free to leave from a criminal procedure standpoint, I would submit to you guys, my law degree background and prosecutor background of speaking now, you are considered arrested for purpose of due process. If your freedom to leave has been augmented for 30 minutes with handcuffs on, that's considered an arrest. And that happened in Dallas, Texas earlier this week. And so we're seeing all kinds of things. But the takeaway from that point about Iran is it possible that God has now removed the horrific Islamic regime because he wants to give the hardy souls in the Iranian church? We need to be praying for the Iranian Christians and the Nigerian Christians, because they're really right at the top of the hit list in terms of persecution this year. Not going a whole lot better in North Korea or in Communist China, or the People's Republic of China as they call themselves, because they keep it a little more on the down low. But goodness forbid, it may be God has removed a humongous obstacle because of the faith that these people have shown, and in light of his faithfulness, God is going to give them a chance to flourish. So again, that does complicate our Bible prophecies related to Israel and related to Iran and the fulfillment of those prophecies. Let's take a real quick look at the Old Testament prophecies, and let's see if specifically Ezekiel is in order here. It says in Ezekiel chapter 38, the judgment on Gog, that's the Gog-Magog war. Ezekiel 38 chapter 1, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, and the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him, saying, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. And then a few verses later, when we get over to verse 8, it says Persia, check that. That's going to be verse 5. It says Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, and the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. These are the nations that are going to ally along with this Gog-Magog person. Gog is considered the leader of this nation referred to as Magog, Rosh, oftentimes being associated with the nation of Russia. So Vladimir Putin, some people, Vladimir Putin is Gog, and Rosh is Russia. Russia is probably in play. We don't know with absolute certainty, but I think certainly the preponderance, the overwhelming majority of Bible prophecy scholars will say that Rosh in Ezekiel chapter 38 is related to the Scythians, related to the Russians. And so we can be sure of that. And we did hear that Russia has apparently been giving aid secretly to the Iranians in terms of their targeting. They've got drones and they've got ICBMs, they've got cruise missiles. They are able to strike back, and they have been striking back. Now, they've been pounded into smithereens, but not completely yet. And it may turn out that Russia was, in fact, secretly giving intel to the Iranians to help them strike back at American targets. If that's the case, goodness forbid, Russia's playing a dangerous game, man. You don't want the Trump bandwagon to roll your way. Speaking of Trump and Bible prophecy being fulfilled, earlier this week, did you guys see that headline in the Jerusalem Post? And I got to thank my brother Cedric over in Germany for sending that to me first, that the headline in the Jerusalem Post, probably about the 5th day of the war, about 2 days ago, and Jerusalem Post, I've been reading that since, goodness forbid, since I did a semester abroad at their law school in Tel Aviv. And since that time, coming back here, that's the go-to Israeli newspaper. It's printed in English, and it keeps a lot of information, especially related to people that are interested in Bible prophecy. There are articles in there that can keep you abreast of what's going on in Israel and give you an inside scoop as to whether or not we're seeing Bible prophecy being fulfilled. Anyway, they ran a headline earlier this week, a few days ago, declaring Donald Trump as the savior of the nation Israel. Now, there's a problem with that, because this little book I'm holding right here has already awarded and ascribed that title to none other than Jesus of Nazareth. He's the Savior of the nation of Israel and the whole world, right? That's what Ezekiel chapter 12, 13, and 14 is all about. Israel crying out for God, send the Messiah now. And Jesus hearing them and coming back and showing them the nail prints in his hands and saying, what are these wounds in thy hand? These are those which I received when I was in the house of my friends. As he's talking about his first coming when they crucified him and so on and so forth. So it's clear that the Bible prophecy says that it's going to be Jesus that comes back to save the nation of Israel, not Donald Trump, not the United States of America, not the presidency of the United States of America. So I think also too that when we see Donald Trump being referred to as the Savior of Israel by not an American, pro-Christian, Christian nationalist, media organ, but rather by probably the most well-known paper in all of the nation of Israel, written by Jewish people with Israeli citizenship, declaring Donald Trump the Savior. Remember, he was already declared the King of Christianity, and he's the chairman of the Board of Peace, and all of these things that are going on. And we found out a day after that, goodness forbid, even more shocking, I think to most people, but not to me, one of the generals in the Pentagon gave a briefing to the troops. And it's like he declared that Donald Trump had been anointed by Jesus Christ to destroy Iran, to bring about and initiate Armageddon. Now, if you think that that's not madness crazy, then I don't know what, man, right? This is a 4 or 5-star general in the U.S. military giving a briefing to the troops and the subordinates, and he declares that Jesus Christ himself has appointed Donald Trump to bring about Armageddon by destroying Iran, and you guys are all the instruments. So I guess it was a Muslim American soldier and maybe a Buddhist American soldier filed a lawsuit or whatever, and so it's now in the system, I guess, and maybe military justice or whatever. But clearly we're seeing apostasy being introduced side by side with the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And that's why in Matthew 24, which we're going to look at a little bit, Jesus tells us to be watchful. We've got to be able to discern. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, be watchful, be discerning, because deception is going to be the cause du jour of Satan and the eventual arise of his man, the Antichrist. Speaking of the Antichrist, now Donald Trump has been declared this week the savior of the nation Israel, and Islamic newspapers are saying he's the Dajjal. In fact, they're saying the Dajjal is the Islamic Antichrist. So you got some people here in the United States of America, and we were going to do a teaching probably this week on the dangers of Christian nationalism and all of that, and how that can be conflated into a false type of doctrine. Paula White, remember, is the pastor and spiritual advisor of President Trump, and we know that she's an adulterous, heretical, false teacher. She's also a pastor. Women can't be pastors according to the Bible, but she can according to the American church. And remember, she had that affair with Benny Hinn when they were both in Rome to meet with the Pope to discuss how to subvert the real American church and get it back into the arms of the Vatican. That was about, what, 10, 12 years ago? And then Benny Hinn eventually got divorced because of it. And she got divorced and married a rock star, and that's when I met her and her rock star husband, and she wanted me to pay $1,000 to shake her hand. And I declined, thankfully. But anyway, Donald Trump is being declared in the very same space of a number of days, both the Messiah of the nation of Israel, that's what the Savior of Israel would be, and the Antichrist. And I've said before to people that have asked me questions on the internet, is Donald Trump the Antichrist? No. Is he a Savior of Israel? Of course not. But is he the Antichrist? No. He's too old, he's too frail, he's got edema in his ankle swelling. He's an entertaining speaker, and for purposes of an evangelical Christian like myself here in the United States of America, having him and Governor DeSantis in Florida, they were at a conference yesterday about sports and NCAA and controlling, my agent's background of speaking, how college football players being paid and it's dangerous to the sport. And anyway, DeSantis and Trump were sitting in the same room, and I was like, man, I'm glad that we got DeSantis as our governor, because he certainly stood up against the C word, VAXX, vaccines back in 2021 and all of that kind of stuff. And having a guy like that as your governor is going to make it a lot easier to be out in the streets and doing street evangelism. You know, the Miami Beach police officer just riding by on their bikes, and they always give me a look, but they've seen me over the course of the years. Some of them know me as a former, you know, state attorney here and all of that. So thankfully, I don't get too much harassment in terms of doing that type of thing. If I were in some other state, though, I don't know. It would be pretty tough to do the stuff that we do, coming out here in the public arena, putting up the flag of Israel and putting up the banner of Jesus. Man, those two things are an incendiary combination. But anyway, some people are saying Trump is the Antichrist. He certainly is fulfillment of Bible prophecy in terms of a false Messiah. Whether he wants it to be considered that or not, he is considered a Messiah by some. And a large number of those individuals right here in the American Christian church, and apparently by somebody over at the Jerusalem Post in Israel as well. But then you got other people saying, no, he's the Antichrist. And then you got those people that say every president of the United States of America at some point in time is the Antichrist. They had I guess, a burial commemoration service for Jesse Jackson yesterday, and you know, former President Obama was there, former President Biden was there, and both of those guys were considered to be the Antichrist at one time or another. So I remember back when Obama was in the White House, and everybody said, he's the Antichrist, he's the Antichrist. So again, we're not going to be able to know who the Antichrist is until when? Until after the church is raptured. So that revelation can't come until the pre-tribulation rapture happens first. So it's good to make that clear. So Ezekiel chapter 38, no. Ethiopia is combined together and united in sort of a union with Iran, Libya, the house of Gomer, which is maybe Europe, the house of Togarmah, certainly that's Turkey. All of those guys uniting together to invade Israel, and then all of them being supernaturally destroyed, not by Donald Trump, and not by the U.S. military force, and not by the Israeli IDF, but by God supernaturally, while the United States of America, Saudi Arabia, and Western powers like Great Britain and Australia stand on the sideline and say, hey, what are you guys doing? Have you come to take a spoil? What is this? But this could be the precursor to the 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 peace. When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as a woman in childbear, you know, in travail. And so we could be at that cusp where this particular conflict brings about the peace and safety of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. God bless you, my friend. And that I certainly think we should be looking at. Let's take a look at Jeremiah chapter 49, because that's another one of those things. If somebody's trying to sell you a book about, hey, you guys didn't get the Jeremiah 49 war, you don't have a book about that. You got the Gog-Magog war and the Battle of Armageddon. You got books about that, but I think you got a bunch of guys in the name of Jesus trying to sell books. I was watching a girl who teaches, and she was talking, you know, YouTuber, who switched from conspiracy theory to Bible prophecy, and she's made some valid comments about the pre-tribulation rapture, but then she interrupts her message by saying, hey, go to my merch store, I got my new Yahweh shirts in. And so it befuddles me that people that claim to be followers of Jesus, I'm not trying to hate on anybody, but you're merchandising not only the bloodstained cross of Jesus Christ, but the divine name of God, Yod He Vav He. You put it on a t-shirt and sell it to help pay your mortgage or your monthly rent. I just don't think that's right. I think that's merchandising. I think that's the money changers that Jesus chased out of the temple just before the crucifixion. But anyway, in Jeremiah chapter 49, you got reference to these guys. You've got these Edomites and Amalekites, and you've got all of these guys being mentioned as precursors to a specific separate war. And you've got that same problem, I think, in Psalm 83. And Psalm 83 lists a number of people that some Bible prophecy guys are saying this is a precursor to, or this is the actual fulfillment of. Psalm 83 says, you know, it's the Psalm of Asaph, and it says, keep not thy silence, O God, hold not thy peace. My position, I think the position of J.D. Farrago over at the former Calvary chapter in Koinahia, Hawaii, he agrees with me, or I agree with him, or we agree with each other that there is no separate Psalm 83 war. But because we see Ammon mentioned and we see these nations mentioned, some people are saying that, oh wow, this is a separate war in and of itself. But remember, this area that is being referred to was absorbed into the Persian Empire long before Persia and the kingdom of Media combined together to form Media Persia. So yeah, there's an area in that general area surrounding modern day Iran, which was ancient Persia, that may have been the home for these different groups, but these groups no longer are in existence, and were no longer in existence. They just sort of bred out of existence. So when you see the reference to, for instance, this Psalm 83 war, you see a reference to the Philistines. The Philistines, oh God, crush the hand of the Philistines, crush the hands of the Amalekites, and so on and so forth. You see the Philistines don't exist anymore. Now some people will say, oh yeah, they're in Gaza. But we've already talked about that, how the people that live in Gaza are not Philistines, even though the land area was called Palestine. Palestine is the Anglo-Latin form of the ancient word Philistia. When the Romans wanted to get back at the Jews in 135 AD, they renamed the land of Israel Philistia, or Syria. Palestina. Syria, Palestina is really their way of saying the Syrian province of Philistia, to insult the Jews. But there were no real ethnic Philistines. They were Syrophoenician people who were seafaring. Those people were bred out of existence and chased out of existence around the time that King David killed Goliath of Gath. Shortly after that, there were no more Philistines. The Goliath of Gath was one of their supermen. They had a super army, and his brothers were part of their super soldier force. And once God got rid of them, they were bred out of existence and defeated and destroyed. And so there are no modern day Philistines, and the former nation of Philistia that existed in the Gaza Strip hundreds of years before Jesus no longer exists. So any reference in the Old Testament to a war involving the Philistines is clearly a prayer, a general prayer where it's saying, oh Lord, please punish these people that have come against the nation of Israel. Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, and the Philistines, and the inhabitants of Tyre. So there's a whole bunch of people mentioned in Psalm chapter 83, and that was just verse 7. So anybody arguing that Amalekites or any other group of people that became Persia, I would say no. Persia was always a distinct and separate entity, and any of those other nations in the area were either destroyed and defeated, or they were absorbed and bred out of existence before Persia combined together with Media to form the Media Persian Empire. So again, yeah, I think that we are seeing fulfillment of Bible prophecy with this war in Iran, but I don't think it's the Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel 38. I don't think it's a Jeremiah 49 war, and I don't think it's a Psalm 83 war. Let's go ahead and jump real quickly with the time we have left into the New Testament and take a look. Man, where does the time go, man? I seem like I'm out here for 5 minutes, and goodness forbid, my time is always gone. In Matthew chapter 24, what does Jesus say? Jesus gave his Bible prophecy overview to his disciples on the Temple Mount, and he said, take a look at the temple and the buildings. He says, do you see these things? See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there should not be left one stone here upon another that not be thrown down. We talked last time how that literally came true in 70 AD when the temple was taken apart stone by stone to get the gold, that it melted. When the temple caught on fire, take it apart. But then they said to him, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And then Jesus gave them signs of the end. And verse 4, Jesus said, take heed that no man deceive you. So he's warning about deception. Many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and will deceive many. So when you see these so-called conservative Christian guys saying things like Donald Trump is the Messiah, or that we're seeing the establishment of Armageddon. Armageddon is occurring. If Armageddon is occurring right now, then we don't have that 70th week of Daniel. We don't have the Antichrist rising and reigning for 3.5 years after 3.5 years of moving into power. And we see that Bible prophecy is wrong then. And so he says there's going to be deception. Many will come in my name, saying I am Christ, and deceive many. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. So we certainly have had that, and we certainly see one going on now. What else did he say? Well, he talked about the abomination of desolation. When you see, therefore, see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. The temple has to be rebuilt for the abomination of desolation, which typified by Antiochus Epiphanes centuries before Jesus. That's what Hanukkah is all about. The second temple that was rebuilt after the Persians allowed the Jews to go back into the land of Israel. They rebuilt the temple, and then when the Grecian Empire arose, Alexander the Great died and separated his kingdom amongst all of his guys. One of his generals, General Seleucus, his great-grandson, became, Antiochus Epiphanes, went into the temple, killed a pig on the altar, desecrated the temple, and they had to have, 7 days of holy oil to cleanse the temple, and so on and so forth. That's what Hanukkah is all about. But killing a pig and erecting a temple, a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies of the second temple was the abomination of desolation that Jesus was referring to as a type when he said that there's going to be another abomination of desolation when a type of Antiochus Epiphanes goes into the rebuilt temple and declares himself to be God. We know that because 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 tells us that, so that he as God enters into the temple of God, showing himself that he, the Antichrist, is God. That's the abomination of desolation. We find out that there was a very near miss of the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. One of the missiles fired, and it wasn't clear to me whether it was an Iranian, it might have been an Iranian cruise missile trying to hit the city of Jerusalem, almost hit the Dome of the Rock and knocked it down. The Iranians are attacking everybody, man. They're attacking Muslims, Christians, Israelis, pretty much everybody. They're going to go down in a blaze of glory, and they almost knocked down the Mosque of Omar and the Dome of the Rock. And that just underscores the thought that it may be that before all of this confrontation is over, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be removed by happenstance, an errant missile, and now the temple can be rebuilt. Some people say it will be done on purpose. Maybe the IDF will do it and not want to take responsibility. But we've never been closer to the rebuilding of the temple, which we see is an absolute necessity for the second coming of Christ and fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And then Jesus went on to say in Matthew 24, verse 23, if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, and insomuch that if it were possible, they should deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not out unto him, do not go forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as lightning comes out of the east and shineth into the west, even so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So when Jesus comes back at the second coming, he's going to come through a wormhole in space. Antichrist is going to see him and have enough time to go out to meet him with his armies at Armageddon. The rapture, again, an airborne event. We find out in John chapter 14, verses 1, 2, and 3, that he's going away to his Father's house, and then he's going to bring us to where he is, so that we can be together. He's not coming back to the earth to get his church. He's coming back into the clouds above the earth, because 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18 says, we'll be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. The Greek word caught up is harpazo, translated in English, caught up. In the Latin Vulgate is rapturo. So that's where we get the term rapture. And because it precedes the 70th week of Daniel, which we know has to happen because of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that's why it's called the pre-tribulation rapture. We are already in a time of persecution for the church. They can tell you that in Iran. They can tell you that in Nigeria. They can tell you that in the church in China. But it is not the wrath of God. Therefore, it's not the tribulation period and great tribulation period that Jesus is making reference to in Matthew chapter 24, when he says there'll be such a great time of tribulation that nobody on earth will be able to stay alive unless those days were cut short. and those days will be cut short to 1260 days after the abomination of desolation. And at that 1260th day, Jesus will come back from heaven at Armageddon to destroy the Antichrist, toss him into the lake of fire, toss Satan into the bottomless pit. So yes, the current conflict that we see going on in Iran, which may result in the destruction of a nuclear facility later today, and may result in even the Russians becoming involved, absolutely is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, wars and rumors of wars. But it isn't a specific fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39's Gog-Magog war, nor is it a fulfillment of a specific war related to Psalm chapter 83 or Jeremiah chapter 49. That's my position. I'm sticking with it, and we're going to keep an eye out on what's going on. But we are definitely seeing Iran being pivotal in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I think maybe doing some chess moves and chess pieces, maybe this is the precursor to the establishment of a Christ-friendly Iranian government. Christianity has exploded under persecution and bloodshed. Their blood has fertilized the Iranian church to the extent that it's 10 times more powerful and 10 times larger than it was when the Shah of Iran fell in 1978. And so it may be God may give the Iranian church a respite to continue to grow, because they've been so faithful in hard times. And it will be during that period of time when Israel and Iran are best friends, and it's wonderful and it's great and everybody's happy, then for some reason Iran and Russia will ally together along with the other Islamic fundamentalist states that are left behind, and I call them the stand boys. And then we'll get that coalition of nations that probably includes modern day Turkey and North Africa, including Libya and Sudan, and has the United States of America on the sideline just watching. Why? Is it because after a period of time when Iran becomes friends with Israel again and then reunites a friendship with Russia and betrays that friendship, Israel is then, according to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, dwelling in peace and safety, and then sudden destruction. If the Iranians, who were their friends for a number of years, team up together with the Russians and do this super invasion for whatever reasons, and the United States doesn't intervene militarily, that doesn't make any sense. The United States is intervening militarily right now. That's why we know this is not Gog-Magog. Is it possible that this Gog-Magog war will be triggered by the pre-tribulation rapture of the church, which would devastate the United States of America because so many evangelical Christians are here? That's where the base of real biblical fundamentalism in the world is based right now, right here in the United States of America. I would say pre-tribulation rapture could be the event that really triggers the Gog-Magog war. Immediately after the rapture, America is now devastated, so we're standing on the sideline, and for some reason we're not intervening. And Saudi Arabia, with all that oil money and all those interests involved, they don't do anything either. They're just standing there protesting with Canada and Australia. That to me sounds like a better description of what we see. This is the precursor to a time of peace between Israel and Iran Israel has already granted imprimatur and a thumbs up to the return of the son of the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi Jr., the Crown Prince, to be the new Shah of Iran, and they would support that wholeheartedly. So are we going into a golden age time of peace that will lead to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, peace and safety that is suddenly betrayed when there's a union between Iran with Russia again, and then the invasion? But America can't participate and intervene because they've been devastated by this supernatural event known as the pre-tribulation rapture, and UFOs are being mentioned and so on and so forth. I think that that is a possible scenario that would explain how all these pieces fit together. We don't know for sure, but we need to keep watching. But we do know for certain that this involvement of Iran versus Israel and the United States is a fulfillment. Wars and rumors of war, conflict involving Persia, conflict involving the United States, conflict involving Israel versus Iran, and then Israel becoming friends with Iran. That is clearly a precursor and a prerequisite to the Gog-Magog war. So let's keep looking up with the time we have left, and let's go ahead and get our Bible gospel tracts out, because we don't have a whole lot of time left to get these out. There's persecution coming to the west. persecution coming to the United States, and with the time we have left, we need to get busy about fulfilling the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Great Commission isn't to defeat Islam or defeat evil in the world. And that's why this Christian nationalism thing that talks about Donald Trump stomping out all evil in the world and establishing Christianity around the world, that's not a biblical concept. The biblical concept is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to the people with the time we have left while we keep looking up. Because as we see in the news on hourly, almost minute basis, our redemption is drawing nigh and our time is drawing short. God bless you guys. Look at the notes and comments and the links I'm going to connect below.